20 years ago this month, a very influential Brazilian philosopher died. His name was Paulo Freire. He was a staunch advocate of what he called critical pedagogy, an offshoot of critical theory, which to the layman is applying critical theory to the field of education and using this to embiggen individuals to act in the world through political and social action. Paulo Freire has not been well received by many sectors in his native Brazil. Much of this is conservative Red Scare rhetoric, demonizing him as indoctrinating their children into communist ideology. So ironic then is it that hardly any of his ideals have been put in place in Brazilian schools. If anything was to go by, Paulo wanted to liberate the students, not dogmatize them. His magnum opus was The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I'll state firsthand that I have not read this all the way through, but I think there's a page in here that really speaks to the heart of the problems in society, in the same way that Oscar Wilde did in The Soul of Man Under Socialism. It outlines the differences between the oppressed and the oppressors. Specifically, it was addressed to the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but I think that you can apply these words to just about any situation you may encounter in life. In any position in which A objectively exploits B, or hinders his or her pursuit of self-affirmation as a responsible person, is one of oppression. Such a situation in itself constitutes violence even when sweetened by false generosity, because it interferes with the individual's ontological and historical vocation to be more fully human. With the establishment of a relationship of oppression, violence has already begun. Never in history has violence ever been initiated by the oppressed. How could they be the initiators? If anything, they themselves are the result of violence. How could they be the sponsors of something whose objective inauguration called forth their existence as oppressed? There would be no oppressed had there been no prior situation of violence to establish their subjugation. Violence is initiated by those who oppress, who exploit, who fail to recognize others as persons, not by those who are oppressed, exploited, and unrecognized. It is not the unloved who initiate disaffection, but those who cannot love because they love only themselves. It is not the helpless subject to terror who initiate terror, but the violent, who with their power create the concrete situation which begets the rejects of life. It is not the tyrannized who initiate despotism, but the tyrants. It is not the despised who initiate the hatred, but those who despise. It is not those who humanity has denied them who negate humankind, but those who have denied that humanity, thus negating their own as well. Force is not used by those who have become weak under the preponderance of the strong, but by the strong who have emasculated them. For the oppressors, however, it is always the oppressed, who are the disaffected, who are the violent, barbaric, wicked, or ferocious, when they react to the violence of the oppressors. Yet it is, paradoxically though it may seem, precisely in the response of the oppressed to the violence of the oppressors that a gesture of love may be found. Consciously or unconsciously, the act of rebellion by the oppressed can initiate love, whereas the violence of the oppressors prevents the oppressed from being fully human. The response of the latter to this violence is grounded in the desire to pursue the right to be human. As the oppressors dehumanize others and violate their rights, they themselves also become dehumanized. As the oppressed, fighting to be human, take away the oppressor's power to dominate and suppress, they restore to the oppressors the humanity that they lost in the exercise of oppression. It is only the oppressed who, by freeing themselves, can free their oppressors. The latter, as an oppressive class, can free neither others nor themselves. It is therefore essential that the oppressed wage the struggle to resolve the contradiction in which they are caught. And the contradiction will be resolved by the appearance of a new man, neither oppressor nor oppressed, but man in the process of liberation. If the goal of the oppressed is to become fully human, they will not achieve their goal by merely reversing the terms of the contradiction, by simply changing the poles. This may seem simplistic. It is not. Resolution of the oppressor and the oppressed contradiction indeed implies the disappearance of the oppressors as the dominant class. However, the restraints imposed by the former oppressed on their oppressors so that the latter cannot reassume their former position does not constitute oppression. An act is oppressive only when it prevents people from being more fully human. These necessary restraints do not in themselves signify that yesterday's oppressed have become today's oppressors. Acts which prevent the restoration of the oppressive regime cannot be compared with those that create and maintain it, cannot be compared with those by which a few men and women deny the majority the right to be human beings. But even when the contradiction is resolved authentically by a new situation established by the liberated labourers, the former oppressors do not feel liberated. On the contrary, they genuinely consider themselves to be oppressed. Conditioned by the experience of oppressing others, any situation other than their former seems to them to be oppression. Formerly they could eat, dress, wear clothes, be educated, travel, and hear Beethoven, while millions did not eat, had no clothes or shoes, neither studied nor travelled, much less listened to Beethoven. Any restriction on this way of life in the name of the rights of the community appears to the former oppressors as a profound violation of their individual right, although they had no respect for the millions who suffered and died of hunger, pain, sorrow, and despair. For the oppressors, human beings refers only to themselves. Other people are just things. For the oppressors there exists only one right, their right to live in peace. Over and against that right, not always even recognized but simply conceded, of the oppressed to survival. And they make this concession only because the existence of the oppressed is necessary to their own existence.